The coffee maker had been broken for 11 days, and Vera Castillo had made peace with it. That was the thing people never understood about her. She didn't rail against inconvenience. She adapted. She took the long way. She bought a French press and a gooseneck kettle, and she stood in her kitchen in the blue light of early morning, pouring water in slow, careful spirals. And she found, improbably, that she liked it better this way, slower, more deliberate. The coffee richer, the ritual hers. She was 53 years old, and she had stopped apologizing for the things she liked. Her apartment was on the 4th floor of a converted textile building in the Greenpoint neighborhood of Brooklyn. The ceilings were 14 feet high. The windows face east, and in the mornings, the light came in sideways and golden, falling across the wide plank floors in long, warm rectangles. Vera stood in one of those rectangles now, barefoot on the wood, her gray-streaked hair loose around her shoulders, watching the street below while she waited for the kettle. She taught literature at a small college 20 minutes away by subway. She had been doing this for 21 years. She had published 2 books of literary criticism, 1 slim volume of poetry that her department tactfully never mentioned, and approximately 10,000 marginalia in the pages of other people's novels. She had been married once, to a man named David who was fundamentally kind, but also fundamentally not right for her, and their divorce 12 years ago had been conducted with such mutual relief that they still had dinner together every November, on the anniversary of signing the papers. As a kind of celebration, she had 2 cats, Merce and Cunningham, named after a choreographer she admired. She had a standing reservation at a small Italian restaurant round the corner. She had a therapist she saw bi-weekly and a best friend named June, who had been her best friend since graduate school and who was constitutionally incapable of minding her own business. Vera's life was, by any reasonable measure, complete. She was not looking for anything. She would like the record to reflect that. The faculty meeting was at 9, which was obscene, and Vera arrived at 8:58 with her French press coffee in a travel mug, and the particular expression she wore when she was tolerating something. "You look like you're about to grade someone," said Marcus, her colleague and co-conspirator in the English department, falling into step beside her. "I'm always about to grade someone," Vera said. "It's my natural state." "I heard we're getting a new adjunct for the creative writing program," Marcus said. "Someone the dean knows, which means either extremely qualified or the opposite." "I'll suspend judgment," Vera said, which was a lie. She had already formed 17 opinions. She formed opinions the way other people breathed, automatically, continuously, without particular effort. The conference room smelled like the ghost of someone else's breakfast. Vera took her usual seat near the window, not the head of the table. She had no interest in performing authority, and arranged her coffee in her legal pad and waited for the meeting to begin. She did not, at this point, know that her life was about to become considerably more complicated. The door opened at 9-0-3. Dean Hargrove entered first, doing his characteristic impression of a man who was very busy and very important and wanted everyone to notice both. Behind him came a woman Vera had never seen before. She was, Vera estimated, about 50, maybe 48, maybe 52, the kind of age that sat well on some people, and she was definitively one of them. Tall, nearly Vera's height, with the posture of someone who had once been an athlete and still carried that in her body. Her hair was dark with silver at the temples, cut short on the sides and longer on top, swept back in a way that managed to look both effortless and precise. She wore dark slacks and a white button-down with the sleeves rolled to the elbows, and she walked into the room like she had already decided she belonged there. Vera looked at her once, then looked away, then looked again. "Colleagues," said Dean Hargrove, "I'm delighted to introduce Dr. Nina Okafor, who will be joining us this semester to lead our new creative nonfiction sequence." Nina comes to us from the University of Chicago, where she spent 12 years, and before that from a rather extraordinary career as a journalist and essayist. She's the author of 3 essay collections, most recently The Countries We Carry, which I know many of you have read. Vera had read it. She had read it twice. She had assigned it to her advanced prose seminar last spring. Nina Okafor was looking around the room with that calm and hurried attention of someone who was genuinely interested in what she saw. Her eyes, when they found Vera's, were dark brown and direct, and they lingered for exactly a moment longer than necessary before moving on. Vera wrote nothing on her legal pad. This was unprecedented. The meeting lasted an hour. Vera contributed 3 comments, all of them substantive, none of them directed at Nina Okafor. She was aware, with an irritating peripheral clarity, of where Nina was sitting at all times. She was aware of Nina's voice, low, measured, with a cadence that suggested she thought before she spoke, which was refreshing. When Nina made comments of her own, both incisive, both said without the anxious qualification that new rivals often use to soften themselves. Nina Okafor did not soften herself. Vera found this, against her better judgment, interesting. After the meeting, in the hallway, Marcus materialized at Vera's elbow. "So," he said, with the particular tone he used when he thought something was funny. "Don't," Vera said. "I didn't say anything. You were about to say something. I could hear it forming." "She seems interesting," Marcus said, neutrally, innocently, with the face of a man who was not innocent. "She seems competent," Vera said, which was the highest compliment she gave anyone on first meeting, and she walked away before Marcus could deploy whatever expression was forming on his face. Their offices were next to each other. Of course they were. Vera's was at the end of the 3rd floor corridor, where it had been for a decade, a small, warm room stuffed with books and a warm leather armchair and 2 competing spider plants that had, improbably, reached a détente. Nina's was in the room that had been used for storage since Professor Elias retired, and the department had apparently decided that proximity to Vera's was a reasonable choice. Because the universe had no respect for Vera's equilibrium, they were not assigned to share anything. They had no overlapping courses. There was no professional reason they would need to interact beyond the ordinary courtesies of colleagues. And yet, the first time Nina knocked on her door, it was a Tuesday. 3 weeks into the semester, Vera was in the middle of a student conference and held up a finger without looking up. 2 minutes, she said. "Take your time," said Nina's voice. "I'll wait." There was something in the absence of hurry that Vera noted. Most people, told to wait, either left or performed an elaborate pantomime of not minding. Nina simply waited, leaning against the doorframe from what Vera could see in her peripheral vision, looking out the window at the courtyard below with the patience of someone who had made peace with waiting. The student, a sophomore, named Oliver, who was earnestly writing a novel about a lighthouse keeper, gathered his papers and left with the particular reverence undergraduates reserved for the moments when they sensed adult business was occurring. "I'm sorry to interrupt," Nina said, stepping in. She was carrying a mug of tea and a book, and she looked at Vera's office with the specific expression of someone who approved of what they were seeing. "I had a question about the composition committee. Marcus said you'd been on it longest and would know they." "Sit down," Vera said, because there was no reason to stand and have a conversation, and she gestured at the armchair. Nina sat. She sat well, not in the perched, provisional way people sat when they weren't sure they were welcome, but settled, as if sitting in Vera's armchair were a reasonable thing to do. "The composition committee," Vera said, "is the department's way of distributing necessary frustration equally. It meets 6 times a year. Nothing is ever resolved. Attendance is technically optional, but professionally inadvisable. The chair is Carl Brennan, who has the energy of a man who peaked in 1987 and has been guarding that achievement ever since." Nina looked at her for a moment. Then she laughed. A real laugh, not a polite one, sharp and genuine. "I appreciate the briefing," she said. "It's more efficient than 6 months of discovery." Nina looked around the office. Her eyes moved the way a reader's eyes moved, not skimming, but landing. She was looking at the spines of books. She was reading the titles. "Merleau-Ponty," she said, noting a paper back on Vera's desk. "Phenomenology of Perception. I'm teaching a seminar on embodiment and narrative." Vera said. I wrote about it once, Nina said, about the way grief lives in the body, the way you can know something intellectually and still be ambushed by it physically. You hear a song and your chest does something before your mind has any idea why. There was a brief, unexpected silence that was not uncomfortable. That's in the countries we carry, Vera said. Chapter 4, Nina looked at her with something that shifted behind her eyes. You've read it, she said. Twice, Vera said, and then wondered why she had volunteered the second time. Nina smiled then, slowly, like she was deciding whether to. It changed her face, made it warmer, and also somehow more complicated. How was it the second time? She asked. Better, Vera said. The second time you noticed what you missed. After Nina left, Vera sat at her desk for a long moment. Not reading, she opened her laptop. She opened a new document. She wrote, "What are you doing?" She deleted it. She went back to Merleau-Ponty. "Tell me again," June said. "There's nothing to tell. You've mentioned her 4 times in the last hour. I mentioned her in context. We're colleagues. You mentioned her when we were talking about the pastor." Vera picked up her wine glass and looked at it. They were at June's apartment in the West Village, which was how they spent most Saturday evenings, cooking too much food, drinking a careful amount of wine, and conducting the kind of conversation that had been ongoing for 25 years and showed no signs of concluding. June was a therapist, which Vera considered both deeply useful and deeply annoying, because June was professionally trained to notice things that Vera preferred go unnoticed. "She's interesting," Vera said. "She's a good thinker." That's just an observation. You have the face," June said. "I don't have a face. You have the face you get when you're interested in someone and you're trying very hard not to be. I don't do that. The last time you did it was with the sculptor who showed her work at the gallery on Franklin. You talked about her for 2 months and never called her." "I was busy. You were scared," June said. Not unkindly, Vera set down the wine glass. This was a conversation she had been having with June in various forms for years. Not constantly, not obsessively, but with a recurring inevitability, like a chapter that kept appearing in a book you thought was going in a different direction. "I'm 53 years old," Vera said. "I live alone and I like it. I have a full life. I'm not looking for. No one is ever looking," June said. "That's not how it works. That's never how it works. It just shows up, and then you have to decide." "I don't know anything about her," Vera said. "I don't know if she's even gay, available, either of the above." "Did you look at her author bio?" "That would be efficient," June said. "The word is efficient." She pulled out her phone. "The countries we carry. Here we go." Nina Okafor is an essayist and journalist whose work explores diaspora, identity, and the inheritance of silence. She lives in Brooklyn with her daughter. No spouse mentioned. Small sample size, but... "Put the phone away," Vera said. "I'm just saying." "I know what you're saying. I've known what you're saying for 25 years. You think I should be braver. I think you should be you," June said. "Which, when you actually let yourself, is the bravest person I know. Also the most stubborn. But that's actually related." Vera looked at her best friend for a long moment. "If I wanted therapy," she said, "I would see my therapist." "If you wanted to be alone," June said, "you would have stayed home." Vera picked up her wine, took a long sip, said nothing. June refilled her glass without being asked. This is what Nina Okafor had told people for the last 3 years. When they asked why she'd left Chicago, her daughter needed a change. Meyer was 13 when they moved. 16 now, tall and complicated and in love with the idea of New York. The city made sense. The timing made sense. This was true. It was not the whole truth. The whole truth was that Nina had spent 12 years in Chicago building a life that was structurally sound and emotionally hollow. And she had finally, after years of not admitting it even to herself, gotten tired of maintaining it. She had been good at maintenance. That was the problem. She was very good at keeping things functional, at making them look fine from the outside, at meeting every obligation, while quietly starving She had been in a relationship for 7 of those 12 years with a woman named Caroline, who was accomplished and admirable and who Nina had genuinely, sincerely cared for, and whom she had never fully let in. That was what Caroline said when they ended things 2 years before the move. "You are the most presentable person I've ever known," Caroline had said. "You are right here and completely unreachable." Nina had not defended herself. She had not argued, because Caroline was right, and Nina knew it. And knowing it didn't immediately tell her how to fix it. She had spent the following 2 years writing and raising Meyer and thinking, carefully and honestly, about the person she was and the person she wanted to be, and whether those two people had any relationship to each other. The Countries We Carry had come out of that period. Her best book, her most honest one. She had written things in it that scared her to put on the page, about her mother's death, about the inheritance of silence she mentioned in her bio, about the specific loneliness of being a Black woman in academic spaces, about desire and its long-complicated relationship with fear. She had written about wanting to be known. And now she was in Brooklyn, in a new office, next to a woman who had read her book twice and noticed what she'd missed. Nina Okafor was not, as a rule, a romantic. She was, however, a writer, which meant she was constitutionally unable to ignore a good story. And something about Vera Castillo, the careful posture, and the quick eyes, and the way she said things directly and without apology, the mug of French press coffee, and the 2 spider plants, and the legal pad with its precise notes, felt, in some deep, ungovernable way, like a story Nina wanted to know. It started with coffee, which is how most things start. The department had a coffee maker in the faculty lounge that produced something technically described as coffee and functionally resembling the idea of coffee, thin, burnt, vaguely apologetic. Vera had been boycotting it for years in favor of bringing her own. Nina, she discovered, did the same. A small stovetop mocha pot she kept in her office on a hot plate, which Vera considered slightly chaotic, but could not argue with on quality grounds. The first time it happened, it was accidental. Vera was making her French press at 11 in the morning, when Nina knocked and leaned in the doorway with her empty mug and an expression of mild inquiry. "I ran out," Nina said. "Can I?" She nodded toward the press. "It'll be strong," Vera said, which was not no. "That's fine." So Nina sat in the armchair. She seemed to gravitate to the armchair, Vera noticed. The way cats gravitate to the specific lap that suits them. And they drank coffee and talked about the essay Nina was teaching, and then about the essay form in general, and then about a specific James Baldwin essay they both knew well and had both taught differently, and then about Baldwin's relationship to the city, because they were in New York after all and Baldwin was inescapable here. It was 40 minutes before Nina looked at her watch and said, "I have office hours." "I know," Vera said. "Me too." Neither of them moved immediately. "Same time tomorrow?" Nina asked. "I have a 10 o'clock." Vera said, 11:30. 11:30. Nina agreed and unfolded herself from the chair. That was how it started. It became, without either of them formally acknowledging it, a daily thing. 11:30. Vera's office. On the days they were both in the building. Sometimes Nina brought her mocha pot coffee instead, and they drank their separate brews. Sometimes they sat in comfortable silence, reading. Sometimes they talked for an hour about something. Neither of them was planning to talk about. It was the talking about things neither of them was planning that Vera found most alarming, because she was a person who thought carefully about what she said and to whom she said it, who distributed her interior life judiciously, who had been accused more than once of being difficult to know. And here she was, talking to Nina Okafor about her divorce and about her poetry, which she never talked about, and about the specific texture of loneliness that came with being an only child and losing your parents while still relatively young. And Nina talked back, not in the polite reciprocal way of someone who feels they owe information in exchange, but in the way of someone who was genuinely continuing the conversation, building on what Vera had said, taking it somewhere, You know what's strange? Nina said one afternoon in October, when the light had turned thin and gold and both of them were watching it come through Vera's east window. I've known you 6 weeks, and I feel like I've had more substantive conversations with you than with most people I've known for years. That might say something about the people. Vera said, it might say something about us. Nina said, simply, not flirtatiously. Just as a fact. Vera looked at her coffee. Don't, she said. Don't what? Say things like that and then look at me like that. There was a silence. Like what? Nina said, and her voice was careful now, attentive, like you mean it. Vera said. Another silence. Longer. What if I do? Nina said. Vera stood up, set her mug in the small sink, turned and looked at Nina in the armchair. We're colleagues, she said. I know, Nina said. This is my department. I've been here 21 years. I know, Nina said again, still calm, not retreating. You should go to your office. Vera said. Probably, Nina said, and stood and left. Vera stood in her office for 5 minutes, not moving. Then she sat back down and tried, with extraordinary lack of success, to read. She met Meyer at Thursday, 3 days after the conversation that had made her not read for an afternoon. Nina was locking her office when Vera came out of hers, and a teenage girl was leaning against the wall in the corridor, long-legged and bored-looking, with Nina's cheekbones, and a backpack that seemed to contain several small libraries. This is my daughter, Nina said, with the specific warmth of someone introducing something they love without qualification. Maya, this is Professor Castillo, my neighbor. A brief, fractional pause. My colleague. Hi, said Meyer, with the practiced nonchalance of 16. Then, are you the one who assigned Mom's book to your class? I am, Vera said. She pretended not to care, but she was obsessed with how it went. Meyer said this with the specific satisfaction of a child reporting on a parent. Meyer, Nina said. What? It's true. I was interested in the pedagogical application, Nina said, to Vera, with dignity. You made her tell you what they said about chapter 4, Maya said. Multiple times. Vera looked at Nina. Nina looked at the middle distance. Chapter 4 is the best chapter, Vera said. That's exactly what she said. Meyer said. Nina turned to her daughter with an expression that was trying to be stern and failing. I thought you needed help with your English paper. Oh, I do, Meyer said brightly. That's why I'm here. Can Professor Castillo help too? She looked at Vera with the transparent strategic calculation of a teenager who has identified an advantage and is deploying it without shame. Vera should have said she had work. What are you writing? She said instead. They spent an hour in Nina's office, a slightly chaotic space that surprised Vera, who had expected the same precise organization Nina brought to her thinking and found instead a warm, productive disorder. Books stacked in unexpected arrangements, a framed child's drawing that was probably Meyer's, a plant that was aggressively healthy and several that were not, helping Meyer with an essay on Toni Morrison. Meyer was smart, genuinely and unmistakably. She thought in tangents and connections that sometimes surprised even herself, and she had her mother's habit of going quiet when a real idea was forming. She also had no idea what she wanted to say, and a completely functional understanding of sentence-level grammar, a combination that Vera found familiar and somewhat endearing. You're not wrong, Vera said, looking at Maya's draft, but you're doing something a lot of writers do, which is you're talking around the thing instead of saying the thing. What do you actually mean by Morrison disrupts the dominant narrative? I mean, Meyer said slowly, that she writes Black women like they're the entire world. Like the story doesn't have to stop and explain itself to someone outside it. That, Vera said, say that. Meyer wrote it down. Nina was sitting on the edge of her desk watching this. And when Vera glanced at her, Nina had the expression of someone who was feeling something they weren't trying to explain. She's good, Maya said afterward, nodding at Vera. I know, Nina said. You could have her look at your drafts. Meyer, what? She's literally next door. That's convenient. Go do your homework, Nina said, and Meyer went, grinning. Vera stood to leave. She's remarkable, Vera said, and meant it. I know, Nina said. She makes it very hard to stay closed off. She just walks through doors. A pause. She gets that from somewhere, Vera said, and left before she could see Nina's expression. Nina had a reading in November. A small bookshop in Park Slope. A Sunday afternoon. 40 people crowded into the space between the fiction shelves and the back wall where someone had arranged wooden folding chairs with the ambitious geometry of someone who believed 40 chairs could fit in a 30-chair space. Vera went. She did not tell Nina she was going. She arrived 5 minutes before it started, took a seat in the third row, accepted a glass of white wine from a volunteer, and read the event program as though she were simply a member of the public who happened to be there. She was not simply a member of the public. She had been thinking about whether to come for 10 days. Nina came out from the back of the shop with the bookstore owner, wearing a dark green jacket over a black dress, and her face when she scanned the room was neutral and professional. And then it found Vera in the third row, and something moved across it that she smoothed out quickly, professionally, but not before Vera saw it. Nina read for 35 minutes. Vera had read the book twice and knew the passages, and still found herself hearing them differently now, in Nina's voice, in a room where she could see the way Nina read, serious, unhurried, with the occasional pause that was not a performer's pause, but a writer's. The pause of someone who was re-encountering the words as she said them. She read the chapter about her mother first, the chapter about watching her mother's hands as she worked. Her mother who had come from Lagos and built a life in South London and never told Nina she was proud of her because that was not the language of their household. And how Nina had spent years mistaking silence for absence until she understood that presence has many vocabularies. Vera's hands were still in her lap. She did not move for the duration. Then Nina read chapter 4, the grief in the body chapter, the chapter about the body's knowledge. She read the passage about the song, a song you haven't thought of in 15 years, and suddenly you are in a kitchen in a city you no longer live in and you are 29, and everything is still possible, and the loss of that version of yourself is physical, is located, is in your sternum like a key turning. And Vera's chest did something before her mind had any idea why. After the reading there was a signing line, and Vera waited until the line had thinned before she got in it, because she was not going to crowd Nina during her professional moment. When she reached the table, Nina looked up at her with an expression that was more unguarded than Vera was used to seeing on her face. You came, Nina said. You read well, Vera said. Do you want me to sign it? I have 2 copies already. I came for the reading. Nina looked at her for a long moment. Let me buy you dinner, Nina said. Nina, not like that. Just dinner. 2 colleagues. After a reading. It's a perfectly normal thing. You're lying, Vera said. I'm simplifying, Nina said. There is a difference. Vera looked at her, at the green jacket and the dark eyes, and the expression that was asking something without asking. Fine, she said. Dinner. But if you say anything that sounds like a declaration, I'm leaving. Understood, Nina said, and her smile was small and crooked and pleased. They went to a tight place 3 blocks from the bookshop, small and warm and bright, and they ordered too much food and a carafe of white wine between them, and they sat across from each other in a booth and for the first 20 minutes talked about nothing significant at all. This was, Vera thought, one of Nina's gifts. She could talk about ordinary things, the bookshop's architectural quirks, Maya's current obsession with learning Yoruba, the particular comedy of teaching creative nonfiction to students who had no idea what they'd actually lived through yet, and make the ordinary feel inhabited, like everything was worth paying attention to. How did you come to teaching? Vera asked, because it was a safe question and she was genuinely curious. I didn't plan it, Nina said. I was working as a journalist, doing long-form features, and a friend asked me to guest lecture at Northwestern, and I discovered that talking about writing is almost as good as writing. The thinking out loud of it. She poured more wine for both of them. How did you come to literature? Books saved me, Vera said, which was a thing she rarely said plainly. From what? From a childhood that wanted me to be smaller than I was. I was queer before I knew the word for it. In a family where that was complicated, and books were the place where the whole world was available, where nothing was forbidden in the way things were forbidden in real life. She looked at her wineglass. I learned to want things from books before I knew how to want them in the world. Nina was quiet for a moment. When did you know? She asked. That I was queer? I think I always knew in the way that bodies know things before minds catch up. I came out properly at 31, after my divorce, which some people would say was a clue I ignored. She smiled slightly. I don't think David was a mistake. I think I married someone kind and safe when I was someone who didn't know yet how to be brave. He deserved better than that. And so did I. That's a generous way to look at it. It took years to get to generous. I was angry first. Nina nodded. She was looking at Vera the way she read books. Not skimming, landing. Can I ask you something? Nina said. You're going to ask me why I said don't that afternoon in my office. Nina blinked slightly. I was, actually. Because I've been here before, Vera said. And she said it steadily. Not as a complaint, but as information. I've been interested in someone and it's complicated the professional space and it's ended. And then every day at work is a reminder. I've built something in this department. I like my life. I'm not, she paused. I'm not good at wanting things I'm not sure I can have. That's different from not wanting them, Nina said. Yes, Vera said. It's different. Silence. I'm not interested in uncomplicated, Nina said carefully. I had something uncomplicated for 7 years, and it was like a house where the heat worked perfectly. Nobody was home. She looked at Vera. I'm interested in the actual thing. I'm interested in knowing someone rather than knowing about them. And I know it's complicated. I know you have reasons. I'm not asking you to throw them away. She stopped. You're just telling me, Vera said. I'm just telling you, Nina agreed. And I meant what I said. There's no declaration. You can go home and not think about this, and we can be colleagues on Monday. And that's fine. A pause. But I wanted you to know. Vera looked at her across the table. She thought about the way Nina had talked to her students. About chapter 4 and bodies and knowledge. About the green jacket and the unguarded expression when she'd found Vera in the 3rd row. She thought about what June had said. You're the most stubborn and the most brave, and those things are related. I know, Vera said. I know you wanted me to know. She picked up her wine. Let's order dessert. Nina exhaled. Is that a yes? She said. It's a dessert, Vera said. We'll see where we end up. 3 weeks later, Nina came to Vera's apartment for dinner. Vera made the lamb ragu that she made for people she was trying to impress, which was not a category she used often, and so she resented needing to use it now. She resented it in the cheerful, self-aware way she resented most things, fully and momentarily. And then she moved on. She had cleaned the apartment that morning, which her apartment did not require, but which she did anyway, because when something matters you don't leave it to chance. She had changed the flowers. She had considered, and then decided against, moving Cunningham the cat off the couch cushion where he had established permanent residency, on the grounds that pretending her cats were less chaotic than they were was a form of dishonesty she wouldn't sustain. Nina arrived at 7, with wine and a small package of something, wrapped in brown paper, a book, she said, handing it over. Don't read it now. It's something I thought you'd like. No pressure. Vera set it on the hall table and told herself not to look at it for the rest of the evening, and failed at this within approximately 20 minutes. But that comes later. Nina walked into the apartment with the same quality she brought to every space, present, unhurried, interested. She looked at the east windows. She looked at the books. She looked at Merce, who was sitting on top of a collection of Chekhov plays, and regarding her with the judicial suspicion cats bring to new people. Merce, Nina said, reading the small name tag on the bookshelf that Vera used to tell the cats apart from behind. Merce Cunningham. I studied dance briefly, Vera said, before I realized I was much better at reading about it. Nina looked at her with the small pleased look that was becoming familiar. I did too, she said. Before the same realization. What kind? Contemporary, West African fusion. I was 14 and mostly in it for the music. She was looking around the apartment. I love this space. It took me for years to get it right, Vera said. I kept buying the wrong furniture. I kept buying furniture I thought I should want. And then I got rid of all of it and bought things I actually liked, and it became this. She said it simply, but she meant more by it than decor. Nina looked at her. That's the best thing you can say about a space, Nina said. Dinner was the lamb ragu and a green salad and bread that Vera had bought at the bakery because she was not going to make bread on top of everything else. And they ate at the kitchen table with the second glass of wine and Cunningham on the floor between them, waiting with patient strategic optimism for someone to drop something. They talked about their students, the brilliant ones and the difficult ones and the ones you worried about. They talked about Nina's essay in progress, a piece about the specific quality of attention that long-form journalism trained you to bring to a scene, and how that attention was a double-edged thing in personal life. You can't always live in observer mode, Vera said. I spent years in it, Nina said. It's a habit that masquerades as a character trait. I would notice everything about a situation and write it down later and call it understanding. She pushed food around her plate. But noticing something isn't the same as being in it. What changed? My daughter, Nina said. My daughter changed things. The way children do. You cannot observe your way through raising a child. You have to be there. And once I learned to be there with her, I wanted to be there in other ways too. She looked up. I wanted to stop writing around my own life and start living in it. Vera was quiet a moment. That's in chapter 7, she said. You don't say it that directly, but that's what you're saying. You read carefully, Nina said. It's my job. No, Nina said. Lots of people do the job. Not everyone reads like that. After dinner, they moved to the sofa, without discussion, without awkwardness. The cats gravitating to Nina in the way cats will to someone who doesn't press them, and Vera put music on, something quiet and instrumental. And they kept talking. It was 11 o'clock before Nina looked at her phone. I should go, she said, in the tone of someone who does not particularly want to go. You could, Vera said. The silence between those two statements was several seconds long. Nina looked at her, and Vera looked back. And this was the moment Vera knew it was the moment when something either moved forward or got carefully set aside. And she was very tired of carefully setting things aside. Vera, Nina said. And there was something in the way she said the name, like she was making sure it was real. I know, Vera said. What do you know? That we're past the point of pretending this is just colleagues having dinner. Vera said. That we're 53 and 50 and we should know better than to do something like this. That I'm going to regret it if I do and regret it if I don't. Which means the math is the same either way. She looked at Nina. And that you got chocolate and sea salt for dessert without asking what I liked, and it was exactly right, and I don't know how you knew that. Nina's eyes were warm and serious. I was paying attention, she said. I know, Vera said. That's the thing. That's the whole thing. She reached across the space between them on the sofa. Nina took her hand. It was remarkably that simple. That was the word for it. Later, when Vera was lying in bed at 1 in the morning with the cats at her feet and the apartment quiet, unhurried, like neither of them was running towards something or away from something, like they were both simply there, paying attention. It had happened on the sofa. Hands first, then a long moment of looking, then Nina leaning across the small distance between them and kissing Vera the way you kiss someone when you've thought about it and decided. Not when you've been swept away, when you know what you're doing. Vera had kissed her back the same way. And then they'd sat back and Nina had laughed not nervously but delightedly, and Vera had found herself smiling in the way she didn't often let herself smile, and guarded and a little helpless. And Cunningham had chosen this moment to step onto Nina's lap and had bit her chin, and they had both started laughing properly, and Vera thought, this is what it should feel like. not swept away, not overwhelmed, just chosen, deliberately and without apology. Nina had left at midnight. At the door she kissed Vera again, briefly, and said, "Monday, Monday." Vera agreed. She opened the brown paper package after Nina left. It was a slim paperback, Audre Lorde's uses of the erotic. Inside the front cover, in Nina's small, clear handwriting, "Because you know all the uses of everything except perhaps this." And Vera sat with it in her lap for a long time. Then she went to her bookshelf, found her own copy annotated, underlined, worn, and set both of them on her nightstand. The weeks after that were something Vera didn't have a good literary category for, which was new. She spent a lot of time in her life finding the right framework, the poem, the passage, the critical term that let her understand what she was experiencing. She had written about this professionally. The way literature was a preparation for life. The way reading trained you for emotional complexity. She believed this. She had organized her understanding of herself largely through the literature she loved. And now, here was something that kept slipping the frameworks. It was small things, mostly. The coffee at 11:30 was now sometimes in Nina's office, where Vera had the experience of being in someone else's space and finding it unexpectedly comfortable. The chaotic books were, she realized, organized by a system only Nina understood. And when she asked about it, Nina explained it and Vera argued that it was impractical, and Nina argued back, and neither of them conceded, and this was inexplicably enjoyable. Nina came back for dinner twice more in November. Vera went to Nina's apartment once, a bright, slightly crowded place in Carroll Gardens, with Maya's art projects on the refrigerator and cooking, smells in the walls, and a chaotic bookshelf that confirmed everything about the office, and had dinner with both of them and was slightly awed by the way they talked to each other, Nina and her daughter, with a directness and warmth that looked easy and was clearly the result of years of work. "Your mom's cool," Maya told Vera while Nina was in the kitchen, in the evaluative tone of a teenager who has reached a verdict after deliberation. "She is." Vera agreed. "Are you going till Maya started?" "Meyer?" Nina called from the kitchen. "I was just asking." "I know what you were asking," Nina said. "Finish your homework." Meyer gave Vera a look that said, "This is ongoing. I have more questions. I will ask them eventually." Vera found this both alarming and charming. She told June about Nina. Not everything, but enough. And the look on June's face was the look of someone who has been waiting to hear something for a long time and is trying not to say "I told you so" out of courtesy. "She's good for you," June said. "We don't know that yet." Vera said, "You're happy," June said. "You're actually happy." Vera, "That's been a while." Vera looked at the table. "Too late," June said. "I'm making it into something sentimental. You deserve it. Stop arguing." There was a thing Vera had not said. She was aware of it, in the way you are aware of a room in a house you haven't entered yet. She knew it was there. She was not ready to open the door. The thing was this. She had been here before. Not with Nina, but with this sensation of beginning, of someone paying attention in a way that felt singular. She had been here before, and she knew, with the tired specificity of a person who has been hurt a particular way and learned to recognize the conditions, that this was the part that felt easiest, the beginning, the discovery, the mutual interest, and the long dinners, and the finding out. The part that was hard was what came after. The part that was hard was staying. There had been a woman named Patricia, 8 years ago, whom Vera had loved with a comprehensiveness she had not expected herself to be capable of. They had been together for 2 years, and for most of those 2 years it had been remarkable. And then Patricia had been offered a position in London, and Vera had a life here, a tenure and a department, and roots 12 years deep. And they had tried long distance for 8 months and failed. That was the last time. That was the last time Vera had let herself want someone fully. She was not going to lead with this. She was not going to announce it. But it was there, the history, the knowledge that her heart had a specific shape, that had been deformed by a specific grief, and she had carefully rebuilt it into something functional, and she was afraid. She could admit this to herself in the blue morning light. She was afraid of what it would cost to let someone rebuild it into something new. She was also afraid of what it would cost to not. This was the problem with 53. You knew too much. You understood the stakes. She told Nina about Patricia on a Saturday in December because she had decided that not saying it was worse than saying it. And because Nina had by that point told her about Caroline and the presentubson comment. And it seemed fair. It seemed like the thing you did when you were actually trying to be in something rather than managing it from a distance. They were walking in Prospect Park in the thin December cold, their breath visible, hands in pockets. "There's something I've been keeping in a different room," Vera said, which was the only way she knew how to start it. "Tell me," Nina said simply. So she told her, Patricia, and the 2 years, and the 8 months of long distance, and the way it had ended, not with a fight, not with a betrayal, but with the slow, terrible accumulation of distance until they were two people who loved each other and had run out of ways to bridge the gap. Patricia was still in London. She was married now to a woman Vera had seen in a photo on social media, looking happy. Vera was genuinely glad. After that, Vera said, "I decided I wasn't going to do the whole thing again. I had my work and my friends and my life, and that felt sufficient, better than the alternative." But, Nina said, "But I was wrong about sufficient," Vera said. "I knew I was wrong. I just kept saying sufficient until I almost believed it." She paused. "And then you knocked on my door asking about the composition committee." Nina walked beside her in silence for a moment. "I'm not going anywhere," Nina said. "I want you to know I'm not a temporary thing. Meyer is in school here for 2 more years, and then university, and I'm building something here. This isn't." "I know," Vera said. I'm not worried about that." "What are you worried about?" A long pause. "That I'll love you," Vera said. And she said it flat and plain, because if she dressed it up it would sound like something she didn't mean. "That I'll love you and it'll be the real thing, and something will still go wrong. Because that's what happens. That's what I know." Nina stopped walking. Vera stopped too, and turned to look at her. They were at the edge of the long meadow, the grass brown and winter bare, a dog running somewhere in the middle distance, the city going about its business on all sides. "Vera," Nina said, "I can't promise you nothing will go wrong. No one can promise that. That's not how love works. It's not a guarantee, I know. But I can tell you that I am not interested in a version of this where I'm inside the glass and you're on the other side watching. I will not accept that. I've done that from the inside, and it is a specific kind of lonely that I'm not doing again." She looked at Vera steadily. "So if we're going to do this, we're going to do the actual thing, which means I'm going to want things from you and you're going to have to let me, and it's going to be frightening sometimes. And we're both too old and too smart to pretend otherwise." Vera looked at her. "When did you get so direct?" She said, "I've always been direct," Nina said. "You just agreed to notice." Vera looked away at the long bare meadow. "All right," she said. All right as in I'm going to try," Vera said. "I'm not going to promise I won't retreat. I probably will, at some point. It's a habit of mine. But I'm going to try, and when I retreat, I'm going to try to come back." Nina reached over and took her hand. "That's all I'm asking," Nina said. They walked the rest of the park in the cold, hands together. It happened in February, as Vera had almost predicted. Not over anything large. That was the part that made it worse. It wasn't a fight. It wasn't a revelation. It was something small. Nina asking, casually, what Vera's summer looked like. Whether she was going anywhere. Whether she might want to take a week and go somewhere together. It was a reasonable question. It was the kind of question to people who have been seeing each other for 3 months ask each other. And Vera had felt something in her chest close like a door. She had said, carefully, that she usually spent August at her sister's house in Vermont, and she hadn't thought about the summer yet. Nina had looked at her for a moment and then said, easily, sure, no rush, and changed the subject. But Vera knew what had happened, and Nina knew, and the knowing was between them for the rest of the evening like a low-frequency hum. Nina left at 10, and she kissed Vera at the door, and the kiss was fun, good, and there was something slightly careful about it that made Vera feel sick. She called June. "I did a thing," she said. "Tell me." She told her. June was quiet for a moment. "You got scared and you shut down." June said double quotes yes. "And now you're calling me at 10-30 double quotes yes. Why are you calling me and not Nina?" A long pause. "Because I don't know what to say to her," Vera said. "Yes you do," June said. "You know exactly what to say. You always know what to say. You're a literature professor who spent 40 years thinking about language. The question is whether you're willing to say it." Vera stared at the ceiling. She's going to what? Hear you, know you? Isn't that the point? She might use it wrong, Vera said, which was so plainly the thing she was afraid of that she was embarrassed to have said it. "People who love you don't use things wrong," Jin said. "People who don't love you do, and you know which kind Nina is." She texted Nina at 11. The text said, "I got scared earlier. I want to talk about it tomorrow morning if you have time." Nina's reply came in 30 seconds. It said, "Coffee at mine. I'll make the mocha pot." Vera set her phone down and breathed. Cunningham climbed onto her chest and headbutted her chin. "Okay," she told him. "I know Nina's apartment in the morning was a different place. Maya had already left for school. The apartment was quiet in the way of a family home when its loudest element has departed. A little more spacious, a little more like itself." Nina made coffee and they sat at the kitchen table with their mugs, and Vera looked at her own hands for a moment. "I'm sorry about last night," Vera said. "You don't have to be sorry," Nina said. "I just want to understand, Patricia," Vera said, and then stopped. "Because that was the start, but it wasn't the whole thing." She looked at Nina, who was waiting. "I have this mechanism," Vera said. "When something matters too much, I get small. I pull back. I start managing instead of feeling. I've done it my whole life. I did it with David. I managed everything so carefully that there was no room for anything to actually happen. I did it with Patricia. I kept the walls intact and cried when she left, which I think was some form of cheating." "Cheating how?" Nina said. "Grieving the loss of something I never fully let in," Vera said. "Getting the feelings without taking the risk, which is," she stopped, "which is a very efficient form of cowardice." Nina was quiet. "When you asked about the summer," Vera said, "I felt possibility, and possibility frightens me, because it means there's something to lose, and losing it would." She looked up at Nina. "I don't think I could be sufficient after this. I don't think I have sufficient left in me." Nina reached across the table and put her hand over Vera's. "Listen to me," Nina said. "I need you to hear what I'm saying. I am not going anywhere. I am not going to be a loss you manage from a safe distance. I am going to be right here, annoying you and making you argue about shelving systems and showing up at your office door. Until you know that, until you believe it, you can't promise that." Vera said. "No," Nina agreed, "but I can mean it right now with everything I have, which is all anyone gets." Vera looked at their hands on the table. "Yes," she said, after a moment. "The summer. I'd like to go somewhere with you." Nina smiled. "See," she said. "You can do it. Don't be smug," Vera said. "A little smug," Nina said, justifiably. Spring arrived with a particular sweetness that Vera noticed because she was the kind of person who noticed things like the specific quality of the light in March when it began coming back. Something had shifted. She was aware of it the way you are aware of a change in barometric pressure physically before you can articulate it. She was writing more, not academic writing, which had always been steady. Her own writing, the private kind, the poetry she kept on her laptop in a folder labeled Administrative Misc, and had been keeping there for years, mostly unread even by herself. She had opened the folder twice since December. She had written 3 new things. She didn't tell Nina about the poetry. Not yet. She showed her one poem in April, a short one, almost a notation rather than a finished piece, and Nina had read it and looked up at her with an expression that made Vera's chest tight. "You're extraordinary," Nina said, simply and without decoration. And Vera had saddened, because she could not receive that without flinching. And Nina had said, "You're going to have to learn to take that." And Vera had said, "I know," and they had looked at each other. The department noticed something. Though nothing was said directly, Marcus noticed. Obviously, he had the decency to say only, at the end of a meeting in March, "You seem well," with the tone of someone who knew exactly what he was commenting on. "I am well," Vera said. "Nina's good people." Marcus said, "I know. I told you at the first meeting she seemed interesting." "You said she seemed interesting," Vera said. "I said she seemed competent." "That's your highest compliment. She is also interesting." Vera allowed. Marcus did not say anything else. He was sometimes, when it counted, a very good colleague. In April they had their first real argument. It was about work superficially. Underneath it was about the thing underneath all arguments between two people who are building something. The question of what space each person gets, and whether that space is honored. Nina had been invited to apply for a full-time position at the college. It was a good offer, the kind of offer that would give her security and a real institutional home. She had mentioned it to Vera over coffee, and Vera had, without meaning to, immediately started analyzing it. The pros and cons, the implications for the department, the way it would restructure their professional relationship. Nina had gotten quiet. "What?" Vera said. "You're doing the thing." Nina said. "What thing?" "The analysis thing, where you take something and turn it into an intellectual problem because you're more comfortable with intellectual problems than with feelings." Vera put down her coffee. I was telling you something," Nina said, and her voice was even, but there was something hard underneath it. "I was telling you about a decision that matters to me, that affects my life, that could change things between us, and your first response was to optimize it." Vera stopped, looked at the table. "You're right. I know I'm right. I don't know what I feel about it," Vera said, which was the true thing. "You staying permanently in the department?" She looked up. "I think I'm afraid of having so much and then having it taken." "Vera," Nina said, and her voice had softened. "I'm not telling you to organize your fear. I'm asking you to sit with me while I think about something." "I know," Vera said. "I know. I'm sorry." A pause. "Are you happy that they asked me?" Nina said. "Yes," Vera said, and she let herself feel it instead of managing it. "I'm very happy. I want you here. I want you here in every way. I get scared and it comes out as analysis." "I know," Nina said. "I'm learning your languages." "Analysis means fear," Vera said. "Silence means I'm overwhelmed. Poetry means I love something." Nina looked at her. "Did you say poetry means love?" "I didn't say that," Vera said. "You just said." "I said poetry means I love something. An abstract category." "Did you write about me?" Nina said. A very long pause. "What's your decision about the position?" Vera said. Nina started laughing. "You wrote about me," she said, delighted. "Please tell me your professional news." Vera said firmly. "I'm going to apply," Nina said. "I'm going to apply and I think I'll get it and I'm going to stay." She was still smiling. "You wrote poetry about me?" "The food in this city is excellent," Vera said. "It could have been about the pasta." "Vera," Nina, "say it," Nina said, gently, completely without pressure. Vera looked at her across the table. "In the spring light coming through the window, I wrote about you," she said. Nina reached across and took her hand and said nothing, which was the right thing. She showed her the poem in May. They were in Vera's apartment. A Sunday evening. The windows open for the first time of the year. The city sounds coming in with the spring air. Nina was reading on the sofa. Vera was at her desk pretending to grade papers and actually thinking about whether to do the thing she'd been thinking about for 3 weeks. She printed it. She crossed the room. She handed it to Nina. "Read it," she said, and went back to her desk. She did not watch Nina read it. She graded one paper. The paper was about Wilf, and she could not have told you a single thing about what it said. Nina was quiet for a long time. Then she said, Vera, don't say anything literary. Vera said, please, I can't take a literary response, okay? Nina said. A pause. Come here. Vera went. Nina made room for her on the sofa and held out her hand, and when Vera sat down, Nina looked at her and said, plainly and without performance, I love you. Vera's chest did something. Several things, actually. In sequence, I know. She said, I know you know, Nina said. I'm not saying it to inform you. I'm saying it because it's true and it deserves to be said out loud. Vera looked at her, at the dark eyes and the silver temples and the woman who had walked into a faculty meeting and changed the trajectory of her perfectly complete life. I love you too, she said. It came out clearly, without hesitation. She was, obscurely, surprised by that. Was that so hard? Nina asked, and she was smiling. Yes, Vera said. Terrifying. Also, no, not as hard as I thought. Because you've been practicing, Nina said. Have I? Every time you didn't retreat, Nina said. Every time you came back. Every time you said the hard thing. That's all been practice. She brushed a piece of hair from Vera's face. You've been braver than you know. Vera looked at her hands. I don't feel brave, she said. That's how you know it's real. Nina said. It was Meyer who said the thing that needed saying. Because Meyer was 16 and had not yet learned to be careful. She came into the living room one evening when Vera was there. It was a thing, now, Vera being there in the evenings. She had a drawer in Nina's apartment and Nina had a shelf of Vera's books and a designated mug, and sat cross-legged on the floor by the coffee table with the expression of someone who has a question they've been holding. Can I ask something? Maya said. You're going to, Nina said, without looking up from her reading. Are you going to move in together? Silence. Vera looked at Nina. Nina looked at Vera. That's so haven't Vera started. We've been together 8 months. Nina said. That's not that long. Vera said. It's long enough to know, Maya said, with the uncomplicated clarity of someone who has not accumulated enough history to be afraid of knowing. Meyer? Nina said. I'm not trying to push it, Maya said. She looked at Vera. You make her better. She's happier. She sings in the kitchen when you're coming over. She doesn't sing in the kitchen. I do not sing in the kitchen. Nina said. Mom, you sang the Alicia Keys thing for 20 minutes last Thursday. Vera was looking at Nina. Did you? She said. We're done with this conversation. Nina said. Alicia Keys, Vera said, and she was smiling in the helpless way. You also make her smile like that, Maya said, satisfied, and picked up her phone and returned to whatever a 16-year-old does on a phone. Later that night, when Meyer was in her room and they were in the kitchen cleaning up, Nina said without preamble, What do you think about what she said? Vera dried a bowl. I think, she said carefully, that I would not want to disrupt Maya's home by. Maya asked about it. Nina said, Meyer is 16 and likes the idea of it. Meyer wants me to be happy, Nina said. She has made that clear in every way she knows how. She's not fragile. She's been through our move in my relationship ending and building a new life. And she's 16 and she's asking you if you're going to stay. Nina turned to look at her. I'm asking the same question. Vera set down the bowl. I have a 14-foot ceiling apartment, she said. I have 2 cats who will need to be negotiated with. I have a French press routine that I'm not giving up, obviously, Nina said. And I have approximately 300 books that will need places. My shelving system can accommodate your shelving system is a crime. Vera said, we will discuss the shelving system, Nina said, and she was trying not to smile and losing. Are you saying yes? Vera looked at her. We're being ridiculous, Vera said. We're 2 grown women having a conversation about cohabitation over dish soap. This is exactly the right way to have this conversation. Nina said. Yes, Vera said. Yes, I'm saying yes. Nina put down her sponge and looked at her with the expression that was the real one, the unmanaged one, the one Vera had slowly learned to seek. Yeah, she said. Yes, Vera said. And then Nina was kissing her in the kitchen by the dish rack with the sound of the city outside and Cunningham and Merce somewhere in the new geography of this combinedly. Faye and Maya called from her room. I heard that, and they both laughed. The coffee maker works now. It is a joint acquisition. A disagreement resolved after 3 weeks of negotiation that Vera considers one of her finer diplomatic achievements. Nina wanted a Chemex, which Vera found unnecessarily precious. Vera wanted the French press, which Nina considered reliable but limited. They compromised on a pour-over setup that is frankly better than either of them deserves, and which Marcus refers to in the faculty lounge as the peace accord. This is the shape of a year. The apartment, Nina's, then theirs, has been rearranged to accommodate 437 combined books to cats who tolerated each other for 6 weeks before becoming inseparable, and one teenage girl who is applying to university next year with the particular organized chaos of a person who contains multitudes. Vera's office is still next to Nina's. She walks past it every morning and sometimes knocks on the open door for no reason except to look in, and Nina looks up from whatever she's doing with the unhurried attention that has not stopped and doing Vera's careful composure. And they say something ordinary. What time is your class? There's coffee. Did you eat? And then Vera goes to her own office and teaches her students and comes home to a life she did not plan and could not have predicted and could not have built alone. They went to Portugal in the summer. 1 week, the three of them, Vera and Nina and Meyer, who had by that point adopted Vera with the efficient finality of a teenager who has decided something and will not be argued with. They stayed in a white house above a small harbor. They ate fish every night and argued about books, and Maya burned badly on the second day despite warnings. And they sat on the terrace in the evenings with wine and the sound of water, and Vera wrote in her notebook and Nina read, and sometimes they didn't talk at all, and the silence was the good kind. The book Nina is writing now, the fourth, is different from the others. Nina told Vera what it's about over coffee in October, the 1-year mark of their first coffee. It's about opening, Nina said, about the specific courage of someone who has built a good life and chooses to make it bigger instead of protecting it, about how that's harder than starting from nothing, in some ways, because you have more to lose. Vera looked at her across the table. Is it about me? She said. It's about a woman who gave me something to write toward. Nina said. Make of that what you will. I'll need editorial access. Vera said. Absolutely not. Nina said. I'm a literature professor. You'll just write notes in the margins. That's called feedback. That's called you trying to control the narrative, Nina said. And then Vera laughed, really laughed. And Nina leaned across the table and kissed her, and Merce jumped on the table because that cat has no concept of occasion. Vera is writing too. She is writing the poetry she kept in the administrative MISC folder for years, and she is writing more of it. And it is better, and she knows why. Not because love is the required inspiration of poetry. She has always found that a reductive theory, but because she is paying attention differently now, because someone taught her, without trying to teach her, that to be known is not the same as being exposed, and that the risk of presence is smaller than the cost of absence. She is still afraid sometimes. She still retreats sometimes. She comes back. This is what she knows. At 54, a year into the thing she didn't plan, sufficient was never the right word. She was always going to want more than that. She was always going to need to be known. She just needed long enough, and the right person. And the specific November morning, when a woman she had read twice knocked on her office door with an empty mug and a question about the composition committee and a patience that was, it turned out, inexhaustible. She needed to be ready. She was. It turned out, ready. She just didn't know it until she already was. Vera is up first. As always, she makes coffee in the pour-over, the slow, careful way, while the cats orbit her feet, and the city goes about its Tuesday morning business below the east windows. The light is the gold gray of early November, familiar and hers, Nina sleeps for exactly 23 minutes longer than Vera, a fact Vera has noted with the precision of someone who studies patterns. When Nina comes into the kitchen, she comes in the way she comes into every room. Unhurried, present, taking the measure of things. She is in Vera's oversized gray sweater and her hair is unsettled, and she makes directly for the coffee and then directly for Vera, in that order, and kisses her once without ceremony, the way you kiss someone who has become the geography of your mornings. What time is your class? Nina says, 10. Vera says, I have a draft due to my editor Friday. Nina says, with the specific tone of someone who is about to ask a favor. I know. Vera says, I might need to think out loud. I know. Vera says again, you're the best reader I have. Nina says, I know that too. Vera says, you're insufferable when you're on deadline. You love it. Nina says, I tolerate it. Vera says, which is what she says when she means yes. Nina smiles into her coffee. Vera goes to the window. Below. The street is waking up. A man with a dog, a woman on a bicycle, the bakery on the corner with the door propped open, all of it ordinary, all of it because she is paying attention. Remarkable, Vera, Nina says. From the kitchen, yes, Vera says. Without turning, nothing, Nina says. I like saying it. Vera turns from the window. She looks at her, the sweater and the coffee, and the dark eyes, and the silver temples, and the woman who walked through her door, which was already open, which had always been open, which she had just, for a while, forgotten. I know, Vera says. You always say I know. Because I do, Vera says. I've always known. That's the whole thing. That's been the whole thing from the beginning. Nina sets down her mug. Come here, she says. And Vera does. Without retreating, without managing, without the careful architecture of someone protecting what they've built. Just toward her. As if it were easy. As if it had always been easy. As if, all along, this was exactly what she knew how to do.